Stoveleg Media, igniting conversation.
This is True Crime Cast. Jamie, as always, here with John. What's up, buddy?
Not a whole lot, man. How are you?
I'm busy. Things are good, though. Got a lot going on here on the show and otherwise, trying to get some things together for a couple other projects. But true crime don't sleep, so today's case is going to be a really good one.
This is a really good one, and I say it a lot, but this is a crime I'd never heard of before, and it's sad and frustrating and scary all at the same time.
Yeah, this case was recommended by listeners Kimberly and Brian. So thank you both for recommending this case. I think you sent another one in as well that I'll get on the docket. But when I started looking at this one, I thought this is certainly fascinating. So we need to get this one on our docket quickly.
Absolutely. Before we get into this one, I do want to say thank you to a new patron member that we got. Suds and Squared Circle Media joined us on Patreon, and I'm going to read their bio because they are, looks like a podcast as well. It's Suds and Squared Circle Media is a collection of podcasts that focus mainly on soap opera, Suds, and wrestling, Squared Circle. And Suds News is live every Monday night at 10 p.m. Eastern or 7 p.m. Pacific.
What an odd couple of things to put together, though. I assumed it was beer and wrestling, but we got soaps and wrestling.
Soaps.
I mean, I guess it is kind of like a athletic soap opera.
My grandfather had a heart attack, and before he had a heart attack, he didn't watch soap operas. But then when he was laid up in the hospital for a week, he, I guess, watched soap operas. So
they'll hook you, man.
After that, we got a VHS player, and it was set to record his soaps every day. And you knew you don't mess with bulls and you don't touch the TV during the soap operas.
Don't tug on Superman's cape. Don't turn off General Hospital, I guess.
I think that or Days of Our Lives.
I've never watched any. I don't even know. But
it's funny because Mama had one and Papa had the other. So,
of course,
which we were kids in the 90s. I wasn't watching TV in the middle of the day anyway, but if it was raining, I was also not watching TV in the middle of the day.
Yeah, unless it was The Price is Right. We also had a comment come in over on Spotify I wanted to read. This says, love, there are a lot of O's there, love your podcast, J&J. Listen to each and every one. This is it from Francesca in Darwin, Australia.
Well, thank you so much. That's awesome.
That's very kind. We appreciate that and would love to get the opportunity to read other people's reviews as they come in on whatever platform that you use, or send in some case recommendations. As you can see, we do get them going.
This year, July 4th will be the 250th anniversary of the United States. And today's case goes back to what we call the bicentennial, going back to 1976. So why don't you get the ball rolling?
That's a good call. Good call on that. Yeah, specifically April 21st of 1976 in Lawrence, Massachusetts. Our story starts off on a Saturday afternoon in the last days of summer. There was a 10-year-old boy named Angelo Puglisi. Everybody called him Andy, and he was swimming at the Higgins Memorial Swimming Pool. Now, that pool was across the street from where he lived, actually about 100 yards from his front door. For our international listeners, just imagine meters, and it's close enough.
A little under 100 meters? I don't know how. No, that's 100 meters.
It's ish, yeah. So this was the 70s again, so all-day admission to this city pool was 15 cents. So obviously, if it's the summer and you're a kid, you can go spend all day there. And as Andy's friend Melanie Perkins would describe, and we'll talk more about her later, but she was 9 years old at this time. She said this is a place where you would go to hang out if you lived in the projects. At about 3:30 in the afternoon, Andy called home from the pool, and one of his brothers came to pick him up. Andy didn't tell them that anything was going on. He said everything was fine. And then at about 4:45, a lifeguard saw Andy walking around the pool area. He was wearing green swim trunks. He was talking with friends. And that's the last confirmed sighting of Andy Puglisi. He was 10 years old. He never made it home from the pool that day. And to this day has never been found.
I know this was the late 70s, but I swear times had not changed in the 90s when I was growing up, because even at 10 years old, I could, my mom would drop me off at the pool and I would stay there all day long. And this was before there were cell phones. There was no way to check in. She just knew that at some point I was either going to be brought home with friends or she would pick me up. And yeah, I mean, nowadays I don't think that would fly, but back then that's just what we did.
Yeah. And it's even as a parent now, I was out of town recently and my kids were asking me if they could do certain things. I was like, no, you can't do that. What if this happens? And then in my mind, I was like, I was allowed to just go play in the creek. Here's a chainsaw, have fun. Like, okay.
And they had no idea what we were doing, where we were at. And that's, kind of the same here. And I think probably not a whole lot of alarms were raised until later in the day, because that was just normal. So a little bit about Andy. He was born September the 2nd, 1965. He was the oldest of 5 children. His parents were named Faith and Angelo Sr., and they had married in 1965. Faith was 15 years old. Angelo Sr. was 19. They married young, and not all young couples have problems, but this one unfortunately did. By 1975, the marriage ended in divorce. But even before their divorce, they definitely had some issues that we'll get to in a moment. Angelo Sr. ended up moving to New Hampshire, and Faith moved the children to the Stadium Housing Projects on East Dalton Street in Lawrence. And this was a low-income housing development in the south side of the city. This was a pretty poor neighborhood. I mean, things were kind of rough in this area of town, and it was a new neighborhood for the family. They had been there only a short time when Andy had disappeared. He weighed 65 pounds. He had brown hair, brown eyes. He had 3 scars along his spine and a skin discoloration on his chest. He had a mild case of epilepsy. He would need hospital treatment if he had a seizure. So this is not the healthiest of kids, but obviously he was good enough to go do what he wanted.
And some things that could help identify him, right? If he was found later on, to say, well, I know that he had these scars, he had these issues, if that could be tested, or if he had been kidnapped and found. So all helpful information. And like you said, as of this year, this case is nearly 50 years old. We did have 2 primary suspects in the case, which we'll talk about more in a minute. But at this point, both of them are dead. And as I mentioned, Andy's body has never been found. Nobody's ever been charged in connection with this disappearance. And the woman who spent the better part of 3 decades trying to solve it, his friend we mentioned earlier, Melanie Perkins, she was 9 the day that he disappeared when she was with him. She made an Emmy award-winning documentary about the case, but still does not have an answer about what happened to her friend. Today, we're going to tell Andy's story. You've already given us some background about Andy's family. John, why don't you tell us about Andy himself as a kid?
Yeah, by every account, he was a good kid. They described him as thoughtful, that he looked out for others. You mentioned Melanie, right? Well, she remembered how they met. She said that she had tried to join a football game that the older kids were playing, and Andy was playing, and her brother told her no, so Andy actually stood up for her. He said that if she couldn't play, then he wouldn't play either. That's the kind of guy that I love. Just a guy who, well-rounded, looks out for others, sticks his nose in there and stands up for people. I really like that. Ended up, they allowed her to play. So that is a memory that she'll never forget. He was 10 years old and had already developed into that kind of person. I think he was well on his way to becoming a fine young man. He was the oldest child in a family that had recently been fractured by divorce and relocation, but he was still doing very well. He was adjusting, by all accounts, doing just fine. But then on the Saturday afternoon, he was gone. So in the background of all this, there's something going on at the Higgins Memorial Pool that nobody really knew about or thought much of in the weeks that were before his disappearance. So what was going on?
Yeah, there was a man that had been coming to the pool and taking Polaroid photographs of the kids there. John, I feel like we're on alert for that kind of thing now. Honestly, I've seen some things in our area where people are posting, I keep seeing this car where all these kids are, but I never see kids get in and out. Like, people are aware of this, of if you're around kids, what are your intentions?
This is going to sound really bad, but like nowadays, everybody has their phones that are also their cameras. Back then, to pull out a Polaroid at a pool, you'd kind of stick out.
Right.
But also, everybody had cameras. Now, not everybody was bringing them to the pool, but I think nowadays you can be creepy and more discreet.
Right. So he definitely stood out. And this was not okay then, even though it may not have drawn a ton of attention. Taking pictures of kids at a pool. I mean, if I'm taking my kids to a birthday party, I might take pictures of my kids in the pool at that party. But as far as we know, this guy didn't have any kids there. At some point before the day of August 21st, Andy had been given one of those pictures. He brought it home to his mom, and nobody really knew what it meant. So again, this guy had taken a picture and given it to Andy, but they didn't know who the guy was that took it. And it would become one of the more significant pieces of evidence in this investigation, because when a man named Wayne Chapman was eventually arrested in a converted blue delivery van in Seneca County, New York, he had a Polaroid camera with pictures of naked children in the back. And when they arrested him for this, they discovered something else. The photographs that Chapman had looked like the photographs that the man at the pool had been taking. It matched the background scenery and lighting like the picture that Andy had. They also found a bloody sock in Chapman's van that was later identified potentially as one that Andy could have been wearing. A man had been photographing Andy at the pool for weeks before he disappeared. So obviously this looks like we're going toward a clean, open and shut case, because it seems like we have this guy who's taking pictures of him. He disappears and we find a bloody sock that may have been his. It seems pretty clear that he could have been the guy, and that's what investigators thought as well early on.
If only it was that simple. Let's back up just a little bit before we get into that and really dive into what happened the day that he disappeared. So again, this was a Saturday morning, August 21st, when he would leave for the pool, and he walked just basically, like you said, across the street. He took his siblings along too, and they were there swimming together, but then the siblings ended up coming home earlier than Andy. Andy would stay there, and his friend Melanie was at the pool that day as well. Around 2:00 in the afternoon, Melanie got hungry and she decided to go home, and she would usually walk the short distance alone. The pool was less than a couple hundred yards away from her mother's apartment, but this day she said that she felt uneasy and she couldn't explain why. She ended up asking her brother, Jeff, to walk her home. And she asked Andy, but Andy said that he was not ready to leave. Melanie last saw Andy sitting by the pool on his green swimming trunks, talking with some of his friends. She walked home with Jeff. At approximately 3:30, Andy called home from the pool. One of the brothers that he had answered the phone, and Andy was just Andy. Nothing seemed wrong. Nothing seemed concerning. But then later in the day, he just didn't come home. At 5:45, a lifeguard said that he saw Andy walking around the pool area. So Andy's closing this thing down. It seems like he's there all day long.
Which I think was pretty common.
Absolutely.
Not only for all the kids, but specifically for Andy. He liked being at the pool.
When you're a kid having fun, the last thing on your mind is food. You'll not even think about how hungry you are just to keep having a good time.
And time. Like, you don't even think about the time. I'll leave when they make me. I don't care what time it is.
Sadly, 5:45, when he was spotted by that lifeguard, would be the last time anyone remembers seeing Andy. So it would, just terrible to think of, but Andy did not make it home that night.
And that would be anybody that saw him except for a child predator. And we're going to learn that there were actually as many as 5 individuals identified as sex predators at the pool that day. John, as many as 5 sex offenders were either at or near the pool that day. And we know there were grown men taking pictures of kids at one pool. Nowadays, we have apps that can track that, and we'll get into that process a little bit later on. But back then, this had to be a very desirable area for predators to go around because there were no checks on them at that time. Witnesses told police that they had seen somebody linked back to who looked like, we mentioned earlier, Wayne Chapman in Lawrence on that same day. Lawrence police would eventually tell Faith Puglisi about the 5 offenders. They told her that because those men had not been breaking any laws at the pool that day, there was nothing they could have done to keep them away. There was nothing you could do to keep child predators away from kids at that time. When 6 o'clock came and Andy hadn't come home, that's when his mom started to worry. She started out by searching the neighborhood, walking around, asking people if they had seen him. And at 11 o'clock that night, she finally decided to call for help, and she called the police.
I think a lot of people will hear that and think that she's neglectful. But honestly, that is late. But back then, it was not uncommon for kids to be out. They had to run commercials to remind parents that their kids may still be out. Do you know where your kids are?
Do you know where your children are? No, you're exactly right. And I think today, especially with phones, and we can track our kids and contact them immediately. Yeah, I mean, looking for your kid for a few hours, I think for the first couple hours of that, she was probably mad at him. Like, why is he not coming home or in trouble? Before that started to change into worry. So yeah, she is at zero fault here. So if you think that's a long time, then you're probably a lot younger than me and John.
Yeah. So when she would call the police, though, I don't think they took it as serious as we would like to have seen them take it. But a lot of this is 2020 hindsight. So they saw a young man who was living in a home that was chaotic. The family had split up. Dad had relocated. Multiple kids may or may not have had the same dad, even though they were married. It seems like maybe there was men in and out of the home, even like all of them kind of knew that things weren't just copacetic. I think there were multiple boyfriends, husbands. It was kind of a mess. So the prevailing theory with police was that he's likely ran away, and they were not super concerned. They probably thought he was with some of his friends and he would show up, but that just wasn't the case. So unfortunately though, the runaway theory ultimately delayed the urgency in the police response. And that was not what was happening. Nothing in Andy's behavior or his relationships suggested that he was planning to run away. But the initial framing that shaped the early investigation was something that they wish they could probably go back and do over again.
Yeah, I think this is an issue that comes up often anytime we talk about a missing person, is whether or not police have a window that they require somebody to be missing. And does that matter if they're a child, if they're a dependent, what that may be? Because there are runaways. And if police spend all their time chasing runaways, they may be missing things. So it is a struggle. It's obviously one I think we've gotten better at as far as taking things seriously more quickly, but it's certainly not foolproof. I'll say that. Once they did kick it into gear, though, and start looking for Andy, it became quite an extraordinary search. They called in the Massachusetts National Guard to search the area. They had Green Berets who were deployed at bases, not deployed, but they were at bases nearby, come and help search the neighborhood. Neighbors mobilized. Trackers with CB radios. Again, this is before cell phones. CB radios They still are used in trucking. So you can see anytime you watch a movie with truckers, they have their call signs and they're communicating with each other. And these truckers were networking in the area looking for Andy. They brought in dogs to sniff the local city dump in the woods nearby the pool. They brought in scuba divers to drag the Shawshene River, which ran nearby. And in all, there were more than 2,000 volunteers that participated in this search for Andy Puglisi. That search lasted 6 days. John, you think about this area, right? There's this small, low-income housing area across the streets, this pool. There is some wilderness, but this also isn't this isn't a downtown in a huge city. It's also not a very rural area. 6 days doesn't seem like a long search, but you can get a lot done in areas like this in 6 days. And they eventually called the search off without finding any evidence, no body, no Andy. The decision to end the search after just 6 days was widely criticized. But again, in retrospect, at some point, if you have searched everything thoroughly, can you continue to search? Yes. But there comes a point when you keep retracing your steps that you may be wasting time. So I don't fault them as much for calling this off after 6 days.
Yeah, I think that was like the large, like teamed searches. I mean, you said there were over 2,000 people. So at some point, that just can't continue at that size. But I'm sure police did not stop. So
yeah, it wasn't like an, oh, well, he's gone situation. It was like, we're not coordinating Green Berets and dogs anymore.
And they had to keep looking into people that knew Andy because sadly, most of the time, these crimes are committed by someone who knows the child. So everybody in the family was a potential suspect until they would be ruled out. So they started with mom. Faith was suspected and she was questioned and interviewed and they finally eliminated her. But then they had to look at some men in her life. They looked at the father. They looked at Angelo Sr., but he had been working in Salem, New Hampshire at the time of Andy's disappearance. And he actually took and passed a lie detector test. And Faith had a boyfriend that she had broke up with at sometime in the morning hours right before Andy and his siblings would go to the pool. So police originally thought, did this guy get upset and take it out on Andy as a way to get back at his mom? And this guy was open and honest and said, honestly, this kind of happens. She brings me in, she kicks me out. It's not the first time, probably won't be the last time. And he just didn't seem like he had anything to do with Andy's disappearance.
Right.
They gave him a lie detector test as well, and he passed it. So they no longer considered him a suspect.
At some point in the investigation, they decided to call a psychic. Now, the Massachusetts State Police acknowledged the psychic had provided what they described as some tantalizing tips. Keep in mind, this psychic was from Texas, not even Massachusetts. So more than one officer, though, said that they believed they were getting good information and there were known details about the crime that later proved to be accurate. And we mentioned this not to endorse psychics. If you listened to us before, not a big fan of what they got going on, but the state police themselves put this on record of they got this information that was helpful to the investigation from a psychic. I think that goes a long way to show how desperate they were and that they hadn't completely given up. In January of 1997, Andy's dental records were sent to Chicago and they were cross-checked against the remains of children found buried beneath the home of serial killer John Wayne Gacy, which is a case we have covered in the past, as Andy did meet that profile, but they didn't find a match. So they don't think he was among Gacy's victims, but that was another path off of the list that they could pivot and investigate elsewhere.
6 weeks after he had disappeared from the Higgins pool, it would be September 1976, and that's when a man named Wayne W. Chapman was arrested in Seneca County, New York, and he was arrested during a routine traffic stop. Chapman was a native of Providence, Rhode Island. He had been operating a very gross spree of crimes across multiple states for years. Shortly after his arrest in 76, he admitted to sexually assaulting at least 15 boys, all of which were between the ages of 7 and 10. And these are in multiple cities across multiple communities in Connecticut, Pennsylvania, New York, Virginia. This is awful. This is a very evil man. He was known to the authorities to be a pedophile and a schizophrenic. He had been convicted previously in at least one case, but in 1976, there was no formal system to track child predators. These registered sex offenders, they weren't registered in 76. So there was no registry. There was no notification system. Basically, you could be living right next door to a sex offender and have no idea.
And that really didn't happen until we get to the 90s and we have Amy Mihaljevic and the Jacob Wetterling Act. So back then, there was just no way to track this. So they had no way of knowing where he was at the time. But they did find his van in September and found some things that we started to discuss earlier, some things that made him a real suspect in this and many other crimes. And that was a bunch of Polaroids of naked children, Polaroids of kids in a pool, like we know that somebody had been taken at the Higgins pool that Andy was at. He had maps of wooded areas. He had a fake police badge. He had a pistol, some duct tape, rope, handcuffs, camera equipment, and child pornography. And then the piece we mentioned earlier was a bloody sock. And it was identified as one of the socks that Andy had been wearing. The van was a converted blue delivery truck, and it matched the description of a vehicle that Andy's friend had seen near the pool the day that he disappeared. Chapman had also worked as a janitor at Miriam Hospital in Providence, where his job included incinerating amputated body parts. John, I didn't know that was a job in a hospital, and I'm finding it pretty disturbing that is a thing. Why would you not, I don't know, if you're amputating things, provide that to the family? I guess if you don't want it, like I had my appendix removed, I don't think they even offered it to me. Do they incinerate those?
I mean, I really didn't think about it, but now I don't know that I want to know.
Right. And obviously, since he had access to this, there were questions about whether or not this is how he could have gotten rid of a body, potentially Andy's body. His own brother, interviewed by Melanie Perkins decades later for her documentary, said that he doubted Wayne was capable of murder. Yes, a pedophile, but he would not go so far as to kill somebody, especially a kid, which I put no stock in him saying that, but that's what he said. There's all sorts of stuff going on in the family Chapman, and there was no way for his brother to be certain of everything he was doing.
Chapman had done this before. A lot of the young men that he had done this to had survived. So when they would talk to police about what Chapman had done to them, their stories pretty much were the same. He would approach young boys and he would tell them that he had lost his dog and that he needed help finding it. I don't know if it's because of Chapman or just other awful cases in the past, but I remember when my kids were little, we would always remind them, like, adults do not need kids' help. So don't allow an adult to ask you to help them do something, especially somebody you don't know. So
Right.
I don't know if that was just me being a social worker or if that was something that was commonly said to our kids.
I hope everybody's having those conversations with their kids.
So the kids would go help to look for this dog, and then he would get them alone in wooded areas. And it was when they were there that he would sexually assault them. The two Lawrence boys that he was convicted of raping in 1977, he had met them at the same Higgins Memorial Pool where Andy had disappeared from. 1 year before Andy had disappeared, in fact, in September of 1977, 13 months after Andy's disappearance, Chapman was convicted and sentenced to 2 concurrent terms of 15 to 30 years. The following year, he was convicted of additional offenses against boys in Lawrence that had occurred in 1974 and 1975. He also pleaded no contest in Rhode Island to charges of sexual offense against children. Chapman confessed to raping at least 50 boys. He told one attorney that he had raped as many as 100. In multiple interviews, he denied murdering anyone. Lawrence police named him as the primary suspect in Andy's disappearance. And then, extraordinarily, he was never interrogated about it.
What?
The lead detective for many years, Captain Joseph Fitzpatrick, is dead, and the records of the investigation were later described by Melanie Perkins in one word: pathetic.
So we see them doing this huge search. They're calling in Green Berets to look for this kid, and they don't even interview the most obvious suspect of all time.
They called a psychic, but not the main suspect.
I try not to throw law enforcement under the bus, but this is baffling to me. Now, there was also a potential alibi for him, but that's one that's never been resolved, at least in any kind of public record. Rhode Island police had a letter saying that Chapman was actually working in the state of Rhode Island at the time of Andy's disappearance. What investigators made of it hasn't been publicly established. Did they make sure they had the right day and time? Did they make sure that the letter was legit and not something that was fabricated? Chapman's prison sentence ended in 2004. Massachusetts officials civilly committed him as a sexually dangerous person for an additional period of time.
So he was supposed to get out of jail, but the officials there said he's not ready to get out of jail. He was doing some awful stuff in prison. If he was sick, it was said that he would masturbate in front of the nurses at the prison, and they tried to file charges against him for lewd conduct. But during the trials, quote unquote, they weren't allowed to tell any of his past. So he ended up not getting in any more trouble for that. But thankfully, and I didn't know they could do this, but they were like, no, he's not ready to get out. We're not letting him out.
Yeah, I didn't know that either. And it was 14 years before they decided that he was no longer sexually dangerous, which is maybe the most dangerous sentence that I think you could say. But days before his scheduled release, he was accused of exposing himself to prison staff. He was called to a hearing about this, and they found that there was no evidence that he had actually done it. Was this somebody just trying to keep him locked up? Did this really happen? We don't know for sure, but he was released in 2019 when he was 71 years old. When this happened, Andy's aunt, Billy Sharm, spoke out. She said, "This was my hope, that he would stay in jail long enough that God would take care of him." Which I'm sure she was not alone in that notion, since he had raped up to or more than 50 kids. At this time, he was moved to a nursing facility in Medford, Massachusetts, and registered as a level 3 sex offender, which is the most dangerous classification you can have. He was later moved again to a facility in Rocky Hill, Connecticut, and he died there in 2021 at the age of 73. His death was from natural causes, but he never answered for what may have happened to Andy. Was he indeed the one that took Andy? Did he assault him, rape him like he did the other boys? And did he kill him? And if so, where's his body? None of those answers ever came from Chapman, even though he was in prison for that long.
There was another person of interest that surfaced years later through a door that Melanie Perkins actually helped open, and that was Charles Pierce. He was a convicted killer from Haverhill. This was a city adjacent to Lawrence. He was convicted in 1997 of the 1969 murder of then 13-year-old Michelle Wilson from Broxford. He was suspected in more than a dozen children disappearances across New England from the 1950s through the 1970s. He had worked as a dishwasher at restaurants in the area, and he knew the area very well. He actually died in prison, though, in 1999 from complications that were from tuberculosis. But he also may have been a pedophile and an associate of Wayne Chapman. Both men operated in the same region at overlapping time periods, preying on the same kind of children. So it's pretty awful that you have two pedophiles in the same area basically working with each other.
Right.
So I think that will come up a little more here in a minute.
Yeah, during a prison interview, Pierce confessed to 2 abductions in the 70s. The first was Janice Pocket, a young girl who disappeared from Tallinn, Connecticut in 1973, and the second was an unidentified boy from Lawrence, Massachusetts, which obviously could have been Andy. Pierce said that he killed both children and buried them near each other. He had no idea, or at least would not admit that he knew the name of the boy from Lawrence, but his description did match Andy. And Pierce told investigators that he had sometimes watched kids at the pool in Lawrence where Andy had been seen. In 1999, there were 2 excavation projects in Lawrence, but both failed to turn up anything as they were looking for Andy's body, so they didn't find Andy or Janice Pocket in any searches they ever made.
Lawrence police were skeptical of Pierce's confession as it related to Andy. In his account, Pierce said that he met the Lawrence boy near the Strand Theater as he drove past George's Diner. Well, here's the thing. The Strand Theater had closed in 1956, and George's Diner had been torn down in 1958, and Andy disappeared in 1976. So Lawrence police concluded that the murder Pierce confessed to had likely occurred in the 1950s, which would have been way too early to have been Andy. Melanie Perkins, however, would push back. She noted that Janice Pocket had disappeared in 1973, confirming that at least one of Pierce's confessed crimes had occurred in the 70s, and if one was from the 70s, then why not the other? Lawrence police remained unconvinced. When the detective was asked about this by a reporter, he told the reporter that this confession did not have anything to do with Andy, so in their minds, they were certain that he was not responsible, but I don't know. I'm unconvinced, and I'll share more as to why in just a moment.
Yeah, just a reminder, like we said earlier, in 1976, there was no sex offender registry in the United States, not at a federal level or at a state level, and really nowhere in the country. And all of these people we're talking about were convicted or dead before we ever got any of these laws in place. Yes, these guys have been committing these crimes all over New England and Rhode Island and Massachusetts and Pennsylvania, New York, Connecticut, even down to Virginia, but there was no way to track that. The states had a hard time communicating, and there was no law that required him to register where he was or to notify anybody in Lawrence that there was a sex offender that lived there or that was nearby. And we talk about the stranger danger era, mostly in the early 90s and 80s when John and I were growing up, but going back into the 70s. And here you have somebody in a converted blue van, literally in a van, luring kids into the woods and into his vehicle. So this is a horrible situation, but Congress had not yet got to the point of trying to set up a system to prevent this. The first step toward that came 18 years after Andy had disappeared. In 94, Congress passed the Jacob Wetterling Crimes Against Children and Sexually Violent Offender Registration Act, named after an 11-year-old Minnesota boy. We've covered that case as well. He was abducted in 89 with, similar story to that of Andy. Now, this requires states to establish registries of convicted sex offenders. But even then, the information was for law enforcement only, not the public. It wasn't until 96 when they passed Megan's Law, named after 7-year-old Megan Kanka of New Jersey, who was raped and murdered by a twice convicted pedophile, that this law made it to where they had to let the public know. So Megan's Law mandated public notification. Prior to this, only 5 states had laws requiring sex offenders to register their information at all, even with law enforcement. So Massachusetts was not one of the early ones to the game, They were the very last state in the country to enact its version of Megan's Law, and they didn't do so till August 5th of 1996, which was 20 years, almost to the day, after Andy walked to the pool and disappeared. And we've mentioned his friend Melanie several times. John, what exactly has she done?
Yeah, she's never forgot her friend. And in 1999, the Boston Globe published an 8-part investigative series on Andy's disappearance, and Melanie was the driving force behind that. She had spent years digging through police files, tracking down leads, interviewing survivors of Chapman's crimes, and pursuing the Pierce confession. She found the letter in a Lawrence police file that mentioned an inmate's confession to the murder of a Lawrence boy, and then she tracked it all the way back to Pierce. So she was the one who had done the work, and in 1998, she began filming a documentary about the case, and it took her 9 years. In 2007, Have You Seen Andy was released, and she went on air to HBO and Cinemax to have that shown, and it was very well done. Isn't it awesome to think about a 10-year-old girl who lost her friend years and years and decades after the fact is still the driving force behind trying to find out what happened to her friend?
I think we all wish we had friends like this, right? Who would go on to do that. And yes, she won an Emmy for outstanding investigative journalism, but she didn't win it to win an Emmy, John. She did it to try to find out what happened to her friend and to try to get justice for him. In 2016, on the 40th anniversary of Andy's disappearance, Lawrence Mayor Dan Rivera held a press conference, and he held up a miniature billboard with Andy's face on it. He asked the public again for any information at the area near where the Higgins Memorial Pool was. They have dedicated the corner there and call it Andy Puglisi Square, and there's a plaque noted there for him. In 2020, the Massachusetts State Police renewed their call for tips on the case, and they continue to collaborate with the Department of Corrections and district attorneys to make sure that everybody's on the same page in trying to put this information together. But at this point, here we stand almost 50 years later, this case has not been solved. The assigned detective currently is State Trooper Matt Murphy. You can reach him at 978-745-8908 or at matthew.murphy@pol.state.ma.us if you have any information or leads that can help to find Andy Puglisi, to get justice for him and answers for his family and friends. And at this point, John, I'm afraid we're not going to get any.
Yeah, I would love to see justice served in this case. I think you're right. I don't think we will see justice in this case. You mentioned that in the van were Polaroids and also a pair of socks. So police found a bloody pair of socks in the van, and they brought these to Andy's mom and to see if they were Andy's socks. And she said, no, those are not Andy's, but they are Andy's sister's. So it seemed like in his rush to get to the pool, he just grabbed whatever pair of socks he could find, threw those on. And it was after the O.J. Simpson trial that police thought, you know what, we could run DNA on those bloody socks to see if they are in fact Andy's, that would be his blood. And then that would tie everything together to try Chapman.
That would be the nail in the coffin, so to speak.
It would almost finalize everything for Chapman. But when they went to test those socks, they were nowhere to be found. Those socks had disappeared from evidence, and it's just so tragic that they had, because technology had advanced enough in the early 90s to probably put this one on Chapman for sure. There was also some people who said they saw Chapman with another guy as they approached Andy. This has never been confirmed, but Jamie makes me think that maybe Chapman had one of his pedophile friends with him, likely Pierce.
It may have been Chapman and Pierce, and maybe Chapman was telling the truth that he had never killed anybody. Maybe he helped or was part of a rape and then allowed Pierce to dispose of the victim there. So I really do think it's yeah. I mentioned that the sock was linked. It was the type of sock they thought it was, but we never got that 100% for sure. But I think even the fact that it was the same type and he had Polaroids that looked similar, I think it was probably Chapman, and maybe he did have an accomplice. But man, I'm so frustrated that he was never interrogated about this, lived to be 73 years old without ever having to answer for this. So that is incredibly frustrating, and I hate that for the family, but I'm very grateful that he does have a friend like Melanie who continued to fight to tell this story. And while I don't believe we'll get answers, I hope we do.
I hope so too, guys. We appreciate you sticking around with us each and every week for a crime case. This one's awful, and it's sad and heartbreaking and infuriating all at the same time.
Yeah. Thanks again to our listeners that recommended this case. We really appreciate you reaching out with that information. Again, that was Kimberly and Brian. So thank you for that. And I know you sent another one in as well. So I'm going to need a few weeks, I think, to recover from this very graphic case about a child being abducted and the horrible things being done in New England in the 70s. So maybe we'll get to that other one at some point.
Guys, again, we appreciate you sticking around with us each and every week. And until next crime, this has been True Crime Cast.
You've listened to True Crime Cast, distributed by Stoveleg Media. Check out stoveleg.com to find out more about your hosts and to find other podcasts to listen to. Stoveleg Media, igniting conversation.